So good evening and welcome to a very special evening. Special because of the large number of you who are joining us from around the world. Special because of the gravity of the subject we're discussing. And special because of the caliber of our presenters and panelists. This evening is divided into two sections. The first will be a presentation by Rebbitzen Palatnik, who's joining us from Israel. And then we will have a panel with Dayan Menachem Gelley of the London Beth Din, Professor Anthony Warrens, who is a professor of renal transplant medicine, Mr. Jeremy Crane, a consultant transplant and vascular surgeon, one of the leading practitioners in our field, and Professor Liz Lightstone, a consultant nephrologist with an expert in who is an expert in chronic kidney disease. All of them are at the very top of their professions, and we appreciate them joining us today at a remarkably busy time. They are on many boards and trusts, and they are also on call, so you'll understand if they might need to duck out at a moment's notice, or we might need to shuffle things around. We're going to be keeping the microphones on mute, but during the panel discussion, David Barzilai will be monitoring the chat and selecting questions that we're going to put to the panelists. We're recording the presentations and discussion, and we'll be making the link to this available as well as all highlighted resources in the next day or so. So it's now my great pleasure to hand over to Barbie Goldfoot, who is the driving force behind this evening, and we thank her for all her hard work.
Good evening and welcome. As many of you know, my husband will soon require a kidney transplant. But tonight's event is no more about our story than it is about the 6,000 people on the kidney transplant waiting list in the UK and the tens of thousands of people connected to their story. My purpose for putting this event together was to start a conversation for us all to learn something new about a subject many of us don't know much about and yet affects so many people. It was during the early days of diagnosis, and anyone with a significant health issue will tell you the days of early diagnosis land like a lead balloon. We were sent a video of Laurie telling her story. Laurie's words were inspiring and they gave us hope. I am so grateful and thankful that Laurie has agreed to speak to us this evening. Laurie Palatnik is the founding director of Menachem, an international non-profit that together with 250 partnering organizations in 32 countries engages and targets unaffiliated Jewish mother. In 2007, Laurie donated her kidney to an American woman she did not know, and she has lectured extensively on what she calls the greatest experience of her life. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Laurie Palatnik.
Thank you so much, Barbie. Thank you, everyone, from our lockdown in Israel to your lockdown in the UK and wherever you are. I hope and pray that you're safe and well. Thank you for giving me the honor to speak tonight and to share my story. It's been a while since I shared this story, so it's really, it's always something very, very special for me. So this whole thing started about 15 years ago when I was living we were living in Denver, Colorado, and there was somebody who my husband was learning with. We were working with Aish at the time, and my husband, this gentleman, and one day my husband said to me, do you notice that he always wears a beeper? And I was like, yeah, why? He said, because he's waiting for a kidney. So he explained that there's something wrong with him and that he's waiting for a kidney to come available, and wherever he is, the hospital or his doctor would beep him and he would have to, go to the hospital immediately for a life-saving transplant. So that night I went on to Rabbi Google and I Googled, kidney transplant, I just wanted to really know what this man who we really cared about was going through. Before I started this, I have to tell you, I really didn't even know where my kidneys were. I knew I had kidneys, and I knew they did something very important, but I guess I was away in biology class that day. So we have two small kidneys, and they're at the base of our back, and they are filters. They're filters. That means that things go into our body. The kidneys keep all the important things, the nutrients, inside and distribute it to the other organs. And they filter out anything that's toxic. Now, so if your kidneys are not working, obviously those toxins stay in your body and you actually get sicker and sicker and sicker. So people can need a kidney transplant for many reasons. Some people are born with kidney damage or maybe in some kidney issues. Some people have an injury. Let's say like a football player can get hit in the kidneys and he can have kidney problems. There can be hereditary kidney disease. Somebody can have like a cancer or something like that. And through the trying to save their life from that disease, sometimes the medicines and the life-saving medicines for that disease can cause havoc in other parts of a person's body, and often the kidneys are damaged. Happens to be that COVID, my husband and I are considered to be high risk. My husband has cardiac issues and from years ago, and he's older than I am. But because I have one kidney, it turns out I'm high risk. So we've been very, very careful during this time. Because apparently COVID attacks the kidneys, and about half the people who get this, they get kidney damage, and half of those people are actually going to need a kidney transplant in order to save their lives. So there's going to be a lot of things are going to be happening even after we get out of this. So anyway, so we've been like super, super careful. Okay, so let's go back to the story. So as I'm on the site, like researching about kidneys, there was at one point, I think it was like the kidney foundation site. It says like it had a list of what would make a good donor. Like it had a checklist. So what are the things that make a good donor? That there's no kidney disease in your family, there's no diabetes in your family, you're not way overweight, you're not way underweight, you're basically a healthy person. There's all these different things. And as I'm going down the list, I'm just in my mind going, check, 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 check. Oh my gosh, I could do this. So I actually went to this gentleman and his wife, and I offered like I've said, I'm thinking about maybe I'll donate my kidney to you. So obviously they were very touched. We went to their doctor for initial visit, and the doctor took one look at me and he said, no, absolutely not. Why? Because this man was a big man, and I'm not a big woman. And he felt that they'll only do a transplant if there's like a very, 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 very high percent like chance that this is going to be successful for both sides. So he felt that unless this man got a lot smaller very quickly, that my kidney may not be able to sustain his body. And they really wouldn't even test. They wouldn't test. So we actually, we tried, we pushed a little bit, but it was nothing, it wasn't going to happen. Like that was it. So, okay. So that was in Denver, Colorado. And then a few months later, we actually left Denver. We moved to the Washington, D.C. area, where we lived for the last 13 years before we moved to Israel. So about a few months into living in Washington, I got a random email that said, the subject line was, 4-year-old Jewish boy needs a kidney. So I actually replied and I said, actually, I looked into this a few years ago. I think I would be a very good candidate to donate my kidney. A few days later, I got an email back that said, actually, he's too sick to have the transplant. And then it said, but would you be willing to be tested for somebody else? So that was my first moral dilemma. Man we know and love, take my kidney. Little 4-year-old Jewish boy, take my kidney. For somebody I didn't know. Then I thought, well, somebody knows them. This is somebody's wife, somebody's mother, somebody's sister, somebody's friend, somebody's daughter. So I wrote back and I said, yes, I'd be willing to be tested. And I didn't tell my husband. Now, obviously I told my husband later, but at the time I didn't tell my husband why. Why bring up something that may go nowhere and just cause like a bunch of wreak havoc in your marriage? So at the time I didn't tell him. So I wrote and to I was put in touch with the kidney transplant clinic at Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx. So I'm living in the Washington, D.C. area, and this is in New York. So they sent me all these forms, which I filled out and I sent back to them. And a few days later, they replied and they said that I've been accepted as a possible Samaritan donor, like a good Samaritan, somebody that means somebody who's non-related to me, that I would donate to somebody I don't know. So and then they gave me a long list of things I had to do, because you have to do a lot of medical tests to make sure that you're very, very healthy in order to do this. And so at this point, I had to tell my husband. So, because most of the tests had to happen in New York, because they only trusted their clinic. So I waited one night till my husband was in a very good mood. And I said, can we talk about something completely different? And he said, sure. So then I told him what I was thinking of doing. Now, I want you to appreciate what a great man my husband is. He's a very great man. I told him what I was thinking of doing. And he said, I saw the papers on your desk. I was waiting for you to come to me. Now, if this was reversed, and I saw papers like this on his desk, I wouldn't be patiently waiting. I'd be like, what the heck are you doing? So I explained to him what I was thinking of doing. And he did not jump up and down and go, yay, mitzvah girl. He said, hold on. You know, we have 5 kids. You have responsibilities in the Jewish community. Like, we have to ask a Shaila. We have to ask a Rav. Like I want to talk to a doctor. And I said, sure, talk to a doctor, talk to our Rav. And then I continued and every time I got a booking in New York to speak, I would always say yes. So I would go to New York, right, speak, and then a test. And that's how the months would go by. Well, my husband didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. So anybody here who's a woman knows, if your husband doesn't say no, you keep going until you hear a no. Okay, so it wasn't yes, but it wasn't no. I told very few people what I was thinking of doing. Why? Because almost universally, when I kind of floated the idea out, I universally got negative response. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? And the people had a lot of misconceptions. You'll have to be on a special diet for the rest of your life, and you have to be careful, which is not true at all. Which really the person who's the recipient always has to be much more careful. I'm just a few ounces lighter, and I always have to remember I have 1 kidney. Don't join the NFL, don't go bungee jumping, and always hydrate. So I hardly have to do any of the minor fasts, yay, because I have 1 kidney. And my kids are like, that's no fair. I'm like, go ahead, donate your kidney. So back to our story. So people were very negative. Why? In general, not just in this area, but in life, sometimes when you're doing something that maybe not your average person would do, whether it's writing a book or building a house, I don't know, something that's outside of other people's comfort zones, you often get negative feedback and they try to talk you out of it, not because of you, but because of them. Because people have to justify their own life and their own decisions. So it takes a lot of courage to do many things, and life begins at the end of your comfort zone. So for some reason, I was completely devoted to doing this. And there was something inside me, and I told very few people, but I did tell my friend Rebecca. Rebecca was a single girl who was on her Jewish journey, and we had become very close. And she also was against it, okay? We used to meet every Friday. She was single, so we'd go on J-date and look for guys for her. And she was also, when I told her about it, she was also against it. She goes, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Don't you think you do enough things for people? Why you do? I said, I don't know why I'm doing this. But sometimes you have something inside you and you're like, you just know it's the right thing to do. Even if everybody around you are saying no. And if you don't go with it, like, you'll have regrets for the rest of your life. So she said, listen, I'm against it, but you're my friend. I'll support you. Great. Okay. So time goes on, and I'm every time I went to New York doing the tests, and there was a point where they want to do a test where it's like a urine test where you kind of like have to like literally like lie on the couch for 24 hours and just pee. And they want to see and test your urine. And they wanted to only do it at their clinic that I had to stay over in New York. So at the time I was going to, as Barbie said, I run something called Momentum. So what is Momentum? It's kind of like a birthright for mothers. We have brought, in partnership with the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs and 250 organizations around the world, including the UK, we have brought really mostly unaffiliated Jewish mothers who have children at home under the age of 18. We brought over 20,000 men from 32 countries. And they come for an 8-day transformational experience in Israel. They go back to their communities with the partner organization. And we're really creating, thank God, like a lot of change, because we feel that you inspire a mother, you inspire a family. Okay, so at the time, I was going to Israel. This was almost like, it really was momentum yet. It was sort of the precursor to it. Like every year I would go, who wants to go with me? And we would learn and tour. But it wasn't the strategic, international nonprofit it is today. So I was going that summer, the summer that this was happening. And I said to, and my friend Rebecca was going to, and I said, Rebecca, on the way back, will you stop in New York with me for a couple of nights? Because I have to do this thing. And because there's no direct flights to DC anyway. She said, fine, no problem. Okay, so we landed in New York. It was like a crazy day. I'll never forget it. It was like we're exhausted because you're like up all night with these women and everybody's emotional. And then we landed in New York and like a freak, like it was this crazy storm, a freak tornado had landed and touched down in Brooklyn. And normally New York morning rush hour traffic is terrible. This was beyond terrible, beyond. There was flooding in the airport. It took about an hour and a half just for our car service to get in to get us. And it took over 4 hours in stop and go, hot, heavy, humid weather to get from JFK to the Bronx. And I was calling up and I was telling them, I'm so sorry, I'm going to be late because they were going to be testing me that day. They said, everybody's late today. All the doctors and the nurses, don't worry. So at one point we were going over a bridge and it was like, really, it was stop and go, hot, heavy, humid. And we had just gotten off this international, and Rebecca at one point, she was like hanging over, like outside a window over a bridge. And like she put the window down because I think she was going to be sick. She literally was green. I said, Rebecca, I can't look at you. You make me sick. So at one point, the driver, this Indian guy had it. He said, I'm pulling over. I'm going home. So I had to keep this guy going. So I was like, I'm donating my kidney to a woman I've never met before. And he's like, really? So now we have him engaged. And he started asking me questions about it. And he asked me the question that I had asked Dr. Greenstein, who is the head of the kidney transplant clinic at Montefiore Hospital, who happens to be a Shomer Shabbat Jew. He asked me, because he says, how can you give away your kidney? Like, you need your kidneys. I said, no, you can live a perfectly normal, healthy life with one kidney. He said, then why would God give you two? And I gave him the answer that Dr. Greenstein gave me. Why would God give us two? One to keep and one to give away. So now we finally get to the clinic, and instead of going to the apartment hotel, like we just went straight to the clinic in the hospital. Dragged our suitcases in, and Rebecca looked so gross. And I remember the woman who's in charge met us in the lobby, and she took one look at Rebecca and she said, "Oh, are you the recipient?" So of course we laughed and we said, no, she's my friend. And so they took me in, and they took Rebecca and our luggage to this apartment hotel nearby where people like us stay. So all day long, it's like test, and I'm passing the test, yay. And finally, at the end of the day, I go, and Rebecca, she has showered, she has rested, she changed her clothes, she looks like a different person. And I said to her, we're laughing about how they thought she was the recipient. And I said to her, Rebecca, you know that if you needed a kidney, I would give you my kidney. Because remember, she was against this. She goes, I know. I said, then how can I not give it to this woman just because I don't know her? She goes, okay, you got me. So we met with the team after we passed all the tests. We met, and I did all the peeing and all that stuff. And then we met with the team, and they said, okay, let's set a date. So they said, so this is like August, and they said, okay, how about the beginning of September? They're looking at their calendar when it would be good for them to do this transplant. So at this point, they had tested 3 women they thought would match me, 2 matched me, and 1 in particular they thought was the best person. You know, you're curious, like, can you tell me anything about these women? And so how did I know I was dealing with Jewish people? And not only I was dealing with Jewish people, I was dealing with religious Jewish people. Because one said, they described them, they go, well, one lives in Brooklyn and has 9 children, and one lives in Muncie and has 7 children. Okay, do the math. So obviously this is what we're dealing with. I knew at the beginning I was dealing with Jewish people because the original email I got about the little boy was, the email address is kidneymitzvah@aol.com. All right, so now what happened? Oh, so now we have to set the date. And that was my next moral dilemma, because it was like I said, no, I can't do it right now because I'm moving from a townhouse to a house. So I have to be available for the move. And then it's the high holidays and I'm a speaker during the high holidays and I can't do it then. Then it's my daughter's bat mitzvah and I can't do it then. And then I felt terrible. Here's this woman and she needs a kidney and my calendar's full. And also people sometimes book me to speak a year in advance and they're planning it and they're raising money for it. And I just can't and I had commitments and I couldn't just bail on them. And they said, no, Lori, it has to be good for you. They also needed my husband to sign off. And my husband had been dragging his feet. Did he talk to a doctor? No. Did he talk to a rabbi? No. So thankfully, my daughter at the time was in New York and she was going to Touro College, and she got my husband on the phone when our rabbi, Rabbi Noah Weinberg of blessed memory, walked into the office where she was working part-time at Aish. And she put my husband on the phone, and my husband asked our rabbi, Rabbi Noah Weinberg, Reb Noach, and he told him what I was planning to do and was this okay? And Reb Noach said, this is a very big mitzvah and you should support Lori 100%. And that's really all my husband needed to know. Okay, so then I went back. We finally set a date that was good for them and good for me and good for this person. And they said, we're sustaining her, don't worry. And I went back and I remember they called me up one day and they said, it was 2 weeks before I had to set up my life. And a couple of weeks before they asked me, they called me from the clinic. They said, we told the woman last night about the surgery that's going to happen in 2 weeks, that she has a match. Why do they wait so long? Because a lot of people back out. And I could see why a lot of people back out and change their mind, because everybody was against this. Now, before you do this, everybody's against it. And after you do it, you're everybody's hero. Okay. But everybody was against it. So you have to be completely committed to doing it. And you really need that support. So a lot of people back out, and people tell me, when you find out you need a kidney, you find out who your real friends are. Some people who you think are going to step up for you to get tested, they just disappear. And some people who you never thought would stand up for you are there for you. And some people get tested and you think, oh, this is it, but then they don't match you. A lot of it's very blood related. I'm O positive, and that means I'm a universal donor. I could give to any blood type, but can only receive from an O. If you're an AB, it means you can receive from any blood type, but you can only give to an AB. Otherwise, you need to get from your blood type or an O. That's how it works. Now they do these chain things. I don't know what's going on in the UK, but in America, sometimes let's say your spouse needs a kidney, but you don't match them and nobody matches them, but somebody else will match them. And then they need somebody to find that person. It becomes the spouse, instead of giving to their spouse, will give to that person so that their spouse will give to them. They do a whole thing where they do chains. It's quite advanced now. So I'm an O, so I'm a universal donor. So that was another reason why I thought this was meant to be, that I could give my kidney away. So I remember they said, do you want to talk to her? And I'm like, yes, I want to talk to her. No, I don't. Yes, I do. No, I don't. I have very mixed feelings. My husband said, don't talk to her. And so because he says, what if she's not nice? What if she's judgmental? What if she's a smoker? You're still going to give her your kidney, but it's going to take away a little bit of the pleasure. He said, better not to know. But I felt that I needed more of an emotional connection to her to get me through the next few weeks. So I did end up, I'm not going to tell you, we don't have time, but I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but it was an incredible connection. The first thing she said to me when we got on the phone was, she said, Lori, what's thank you? I'm just going to say thank you. And then she asked me, who are you? So I told her to go online and go to this website, and that's who I am and that's what I do. And the first conversation we had, we talked for 4 hours. We're the same age. We're both the energy bunny. We're the energizer bunny of our families. And she said that she exercises, she's in education, and she had a hernia. She had routine blood tests to take care of the hernia. And they came back and they said, something's wrong with you. Because sometimes when your kidneys are failing, you don't know anything's wrong until it's basically too late. And they said that their only chance was a kidney donation transplant. And in New York State, it's a 5 to 8 year waiting list for a kidney. And usually that's a cadaver kidney, somebody who's passed away. And it's much better to get it from a healthy live kidney. And everybody around her was tested and it was a whole long thing. Anyway, okay. So when it came down to the actual time to go, the plan was my husband was going to go with me. We were going to go, the surgery was on a Thursday and we were going to drive to New York on a Sunday. They're going to test me Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then he was going to go back and spend Shabbos with the kids. And then I realized this is a bad plan. There's a reason my husband became a rabbi and not a doctor. He's not good with blood. And this is who I'm bringing to my, to support me. This is not a good plan. So when I give birth, my husband's a deer in the headlights. Okay. He's just, he's not so good with these things. So instead I went with Rebecca and my husband was very relieved. So I went with Rebecca and I remember I was tested on Monday, Tuesday, and on, we actually, on the way to New York, she called and she invited us for dinner, to come for dinner. And I remember like so nervous about going there. Rebecca and I were going, it was like a first date. And when we got there to meet her and her husband, you can imagine after all these months, it was so emotional to meet this woman. And she made this delicious dinner for us and she ate nothing. And I said, why aren't you eating? She goes, well, I'm on a very restricted diet. They told me this woman is going to take very good care of your kidney. She follows all the rules. She says, I can't eat any for the last, for a year, I can't eat any protein, no potassium, no citrus. I go, what do you eat? She goes, well, today for lunch, I had rice cakes and for a treat, I put some mayonnaise on them. So afterwards, I remember her husband kept trying to thank me and I kept crying every time he was looking at me. And I'm like, it's okay, it's okay. And she showed me her wedding albums since she was diagnosed, she married off 3 of her children. And I'm looking at the wedding albums and you couldn't tell, she's a very private person. You couldn't tell, her pallor was slightly off, but only the people close to her knew what was going on. And I asked her, I said, at your last daughter's wedding, like, what were you thinking? Like, nobody matches you. You're on this long waiting list. This is your only chance. And she said, as my daughter was walking down the aisle, I was thinking, she's marrying a good guy. She's going to be okay. If I don't make it, she's going to be okay. She goes, I just wanted to live to marry off my last 2 kids. So I was tested and she's tested on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. On Wednesday, I met the doctor who was going to take the kidney out of me. And Dr. Greenstein was going to put the kidney into her. And this young doctor, she said to me, I had to sign all these papers. Like, basically, it's like an appendix, okay? But if you go under anesthesia, the chances of something going wrong is kind of like an appendix. So, and they do it laparoscopically. But the chances, but you still have to sign because of anesthesia, like something could go wrong and, God forbid. So I'm signing these things. And she said to me, this surgeon, she said, Lori, when they're wheeling you into the operating room, you can change your mind. I'm not going to tell you I'm not going to tell them you change your mind. It'll be on me. I'll tell them I found something and they're like medically and we can't do it. She goes, you can still change your mind. So I remember that night, to distract me the night before, because I was nervous, we went out for dinner with my daughter, who was at Touro College at the time, and her friends. And I remember when we got to the restaurant with her friends, I got a phone call. On the way, I got a phone call from this woman. This is how great she is. She calls me up. I go, how you doing? How you feeling? She goes, Lori, I'm calling to tell you, you don't have to do this. You have 5 children. You have responsibilities in the Jewish world. It's okay. I'll be okay. She was giving me a total get out of jail free card. I said, I'm telling you, I'm not that nice. If it was reversed, I'd be at home davening like, don't change your mind, don't change your mind, don't change your mind. And here's this woman telling me it's okay. You don't have to do this. And I said, you will see me at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning at the hospital. You can count on me. When we got to the restaurant, I got a phone call and it was her son. He's a young adult. And I excused myself from the table and he said to me, I'm calling, because she didn't tell her kids until she made that phone call, because she knew that people do back out and she didn't want to put her kids through this. So she said, her son said to me, I'm calling on behalf of all the kids to thank you for saving our mommy's life. We love our mommy so much. So the next morning, I'm with Rebecca, I'm with my daughter, they're prepping me, they're prepping her, she's with her husband. And people asked me, was there ever a time that you thought of backing out? And there was one moment. So they wheeling me in, and the woman, no, they're not wheeling me in. Like, I thought they're going to wheel me in, but no, I've got my IV and I'm walking with the nurse into the operating room. So there's a semi-sterile room before the operating room, and she opens up the semi-sterile room, and she puts her hand on the operating room door, and she goes, "Okay, Lori, are you ready?" I said, "Hold on." And I knew I had to say the Shema before they put me under. And I said, I have to say a prayer. So I said the Shema. And then I was like, talk to Hashem. Like, what do I want? Why do I want it? I want to live. Why? What am I going to do with my life? And I want her to live. And then I said, okay. So then we walk in, and I freaked out. I didn't know what I was expecting. I thought a doctor, a nurse, an anesthesiologist. There was like 30 people in the room. They're all running around. It's cold. They have to make it sterile. They have concave mirrors. They have this steel slab of a table with straps on it. It looks like an autopsy is supposed to take place. And I'm supposed to get on that table. And I froze. And I thought to myself, Lori, what are you doing? And I closed my eyes and I said to myself, just do it, just do it. And I walked over and I laid out on the table. And the next thing I knew, I was in recovery. I have no memory of it. They came, Dr. Greenstein, it was a few hours before they brought her in after her surgery. And Dr. Greenstein said to me, Lori, she's pishing up a storm. You have a great kidney. There's something called your creatinine level. And if you're at a 10, you have to be on dialysis, and you get sicker and sicker on dialysis. And she was a 9 going into the surgery. And in 24 hours with my kidney, she was a 1.4. So 2 years after the surgery, she invited me to her daughter's wedding. So of course I went to Muncie to go with Rebecca to go to her daughter's wedding. So how do you think I felt at her daughter's chuppah? I'm sitting there. There's the chuppah. She's there with her husband and her daughter. After the chuppah, they leave, and she runs into my arms, and she's crying, and she thanking me for letting her live to see this day. I have no words for how I felt at that moment. What amount of money would I have traded to trade that moment away? What possession, what experience would I have traded that moment for? Nothing. It was priceless, absolutely priceless. So some people, does anybody hear music? I hear music. Why do I hear music? Hold on a second here. I'm sorry. Okay, something's going on with my, okay, I'm shutting it off. I don't know. Does anybody hear music, or is it just me? Oh, it's so funny. I hear music in it's like there's music behind my story. So people often criticize me. I'm just going to end with this, that how could this, when I say this is the greatest experience of my life, how could it be greater than having children? Because the initial desire to have a child is actually a selfish desire. I want a baby. See my baby? This was the purest opportunity that God ever gave me to give, just to give, with nothing in return. Because people say, well, oh yeah, I would give to my spouse, I would give to my kid, I give to my brother, but to give to somebody you don't even know, I'd rather give it to somebody I don't know. I'm glad nobody I know needs a kidney. And I also don't want people to feel like they owe me anything. You want my kid, you need a kidney, take my kidney, have a good life, Gesundheit hate. She's an amazing person. And the only regret that I have, and the only regret that any kidney donor I know has ever had, is that you can't do it again. Because if you could, you would.
That was just an amazing story, Laurie. Thank you so much. Hang on, let me just remove the spotlight there. Thank you so much and for sharing that. And you heard the music, we felt it as incredibly powerful and inspirational. And yishakach on your donation. And I hope that you can continue to inspire people through the phenomenal work that you and your family do, and with the knowledge that you have given life and joy, not only to one person, but to their family and everything that follows on from that. So thank you so much for joining us this evening.
My pleasure. Thank you for the honor of speaking to you.
Just a reminder that in absolutely every country there are different protocols governing who you can donate to and how it all works. So one of the things that might come up during the discussion that we have ahead is some clarification on the position here in England and how one can make either directed and pooled donations. I now get head over to the panel itself, and I am delighted to first of all introduce Dayan Menachem Gelley, Rosh Beth Din of the London Beth Din. Dayan Gelley was born in Newcastle and studied at Gateshead Boarding School, Sunderland Yeshiva, which was headed by his father, and Ponovitch Yeshiva in Bnei Barak before moving to the Gateshead Kollel. He trained as a Dayan at Batei Din in the United States and Israel and joined the London Beth Din in 1993. He is a tower of strength to our rabbinate, a mensch and a mentor, and we're privileged that he serves our community. Dayan Gelley, welcome this evening. Let me switch the spotlight to you. And many of us were raised with the idea that organ transplantation was a taboo and that we shouldn't harm ourselves, that we should aim to be buried whole. So what's changed?
Good evening, everybody. If I could just first make a comment to Ms. Barbie Goldfoot for arranging this magnificent evening. It is really so important. Some months ago, I sat with Professor Warrens amongst a number of other distinguished consultants, and the issue there was cadaver donation, and that's more halachically problematic. And I actually, of my own volition, did raise the concept that is less known in England at this time, and that is of live donation. So I really feel it's a great assistance to the community that this issue is raised in public as it is tonight. Now, Rabbi Lawrence, first of all, thank you for your beautiful introduction, exaggerated, of course, for me. In terms of the taboo, okay, you know, there's so much ignorance around within the community with regard to donation and organ donation and cadaver and live. You know, it's not a wonder unless people are informed, and they're not going to know. So in terms of the taboo, I don't think we need to be really concerned about that. I think what has changed also, if I could just mention the concept of being buried whole, that is incorrect. There is a concept whereby, God forbid, if a person has a limb removed, for example, a foot, it can happen, then it is customary, again, it's not absolute halacha that limb should be buried, or at least buried with that person after 120. That is an idea. However, where we're not talking about a limb, etc., we're talking about something like a spleen, a kidney, whatever it may be, then there's no halacha that has ultimately got to be buried with a person. Certainly, if it was removed during a lifetime, then when that donor passes on to a better world, then the obligation of burial is only what that person is at that time. So there is no problem whatsoever in terms of an eventual burial. So that is not a problem.
Would you describe donation as a mitzvah?
Okay, so it's actually very interesting. Mitzvah to the wider community, I think I would split the word mitzvah into two parts. There's one area, and I think it's actually extremely important to stress this in this context. There's one mitzvah that we translate as obligatory and obligation. So we've got a mitzvah to eat matzah on the eve of Pesach. We've got a mitzvah to shake a lulav and esrog on Sukkot, etc., etc. Mitzvah, the wider community, correctly so, also translates as having done a good deed. You have something in the UK called Mitzvah Day, when people do all types of good deeds for all different type of people, Jews, non-Jews alike. So one thing is for sure, that donating a live kidney, giving a live donation, certainly falls into the latter, whereby it's not only a great deed that's understated, it must be one of the greatest of great deeds of chesed. There's no question about that. But I think it is important, however, to stress, and that is, if we were to discuss possibly one or two of the possible, I won't say drawbacks, but issues in halacha, it's very difficult to say that is a mitzvah in terms of an obligation. Now, I may tell you, I may make a case that it is. Are you aware that there is a verse in the Torah that commands us, in a situation where a person, God forbid, is drowning or is in another life-threatening situation, one does not have the option to just walk by and avoid. There is, the verse says, Lo samod al dam re'echo, do not stand idly over the blood of your friend, which means you have an obligation, first type of mitzvah, an absolute obligation to assist that person. Now, obviously, if the person, God forbid, has fallen to a lion's den, it's not going to be helpful for you to follow that person, because it's obviously, you're not going to be able to help that person. Shulchan Aruch tells us, and this comes from the Talmud as well, if you cannot help personally, then you've got an obligation again, mandatory, to take your own funds or to raise funds and help that person with funds, if that's what will do the trick to save this person from a life-threatening situation. If so, friends, you could all say to me, well, surely that's it. There's a person over here who has kidney failure, a person over here who very likely, even if they begin with dialysis, there's a possibility that they may not be able to live, or at least a full life expectancy. Have I not got an obligation to go and assist them? Here we fall short. Here that means to say is we step back a little bit and we say that since there is an element of risk, and I'm happy to hear from the consultants later as to what the element is, even if it's very small, but this was ruled upon going back to the Radvaz in the 17th century, that one is not obligated. It's not mandatory for a person to be blinded or a person to give their own limb, even if it means that by that they will save somebody else's life. You cannot say to a person, you have absolutely got to, it's mandatory. You've got no option out of this. No, that is not quite correct. That's not correct. However, it certainly falls in the category of mitzvah, which is a good deed. We live our lives to emulate God, and God is the ultimate giver of chesed, of kindness, and the mitzvah in the Torah of Alachta b'drachav is to emulate God, is to be kind to our fellow person. This is the very essence of Judaism, and there cannot be a greater mitzvah than the mitzvah of giving a live organ. At the same time, as I said, it's not mandatory and it's not obligatory.
I love your description of it as one of the greatest of great deeds of chesed. And with that in mind, if somebody was moved to give, I mean, you've structured why it is we should give. If somebody was moved to give, what would you say the halachic considerations they should have as to whether or not to proceed with that?
So I do think one should always discuss with people. We heard very clearly earlier why not, and that just adds to the speaker's mitzvah, because it was all done with the greatest of tensions and the Shem Shamayim, and everybody's situation is different. There's no question about that. Having said that, one does have to look at one's family and to wider considerations, and one has to look at this holistic picture. It's not something one goes into impulsively, but I think the mitzvah becomes even more beautiful when it's calculated, and one does know there is, even if it's a very, very small element of risk, and one knows one can live with one takes a calculated decision that this is going to help somebody else's life, and therefore I want to do it. But there are no other halachic sort of principles that we haven't mentioned that one would have to be concerned about.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dayan. Gelley, we'll come back to you if, with some questions as the chat continues. But thank you for everything that you've contributed over your leadership over the current crisis as well, and your sympathies and support to communities and indeed to their rabbis. Professor Anthony Warrens has an international reputation. He's Dean for Education and Director of the Institute of Health Science Education at Barts and the London School of Medicine and Dentistry. He's served as Professor of Renal and Transplantation Medicine at Queen Mary and at Imperial College London. He's a former president of the British Transplantation Society and has sat on several governmental bodies developing UK policy and advice on matters relating to transplantation. He's a respected voice on many educational and ethical boards within the Jewish community and a valued member of Finchley United Synagogue. So good evening to you, Professor Warrens. And just to begin with, could you explain what is meant by altruistic and unseen donation?
Well, good evening to you, and good evening to the other members of the panel, indeed, people participating in the event this evening. And congratulations to Barbie for setting this up, and indeed yourself. And many thanks to Rebbitzen Palatnik for her very inspiring introductory comments. Of course, when we're talking about living donation, all living donation essentially is altruistic. Because you are doing that for the benefit principally of somebody else. But what we've heard from Rebbitzen Palatnik is that there are some people who can give without knowing who the recipient is. And in fact, in this country, they will never know who the recipient is, which is different to the experience that she's described. So it is a very a high level of altruism, because the donor's identity and the recipient's identity are not known to the other. In that sense, it's unseen. But as I say, when you give to your spouse, for example, or a close relative, that is an act of altruism. And one way of doing that, I think we're going to be hearing from Professor Lightstone later on, is to do that through the so-called paired pooled system, where you don't give directly to an individual, but you facilitate your identified potential donor by giving through a national sharing scheme. But I'll leave that to Liz to talk about.
Thanks. What are the practical challenges of consent?
So it's a very big issue. And you heard from Rebbitzen Palatnik how she was asked on numerous occasions, is this something you really want to do? And I'll go into this in a little bit more detail. We have in this country a thing called the Human Tissue Act, which is regulated by a Human Tissue Authority, of which I happen to be a member. And every single donation that is going to be, a living donation is going to be take place, has to be reviewed by the Human Tissue Authority. And before doing that, there is an independent adjudicator who interviews the potential recipient. And also, it's careful that we make sure that the doctors looking after the potential donor and the potential recipient are kept separate, in the sense that they are focused on the interests of that individual. So that, I've looked after many people who've wanted a transplant for many years. It's not appropriate that I should be the person that's looking after the interests of the potential donor, because I need to be absolutely focused on what's on that person's interests. So this system is set up to make sure that the potential donor is as protected as possible. In law, the Human Tissue Authority has to make sure that the potential donor is making an informed decision, that they've been given enough information to know the very small risks that they're taking. But as Rebbitzen Palatnik said, there are very small risks associated with it, and therefore it needs to be an informed decision. What is going to happen? What are the risks? How are they going to feel after doing it? And what are the long-term risks that they're taking? Also, it is illegal for this to be a commercial activity. And so one of the things that we have to assure is that there is no reward involved in this, not just financial, but any other sort of reward. And possibly more important and more likely is no element of coercion. And I have come across a number of occasions in which there has been very subtle pressure put on a junior member of the family to donate an organ to another member of the family. And just as Rebbitzen Palatnik said, the doctors will find a way of giving the potential donor a way out that doesn't then mean that they damage their relationship with their families. We would do something similar in this country. So what's really important is that we keep focused on the interests of the potential donor to make sure that they wish to do that, but they're doing it in an informed way and they're not being in any sense coerced.
Right, thank you for that. We hear about people going overseas because there are facilities for operation there without so much red tape. You just make some comment on that and the dangers of it.
So the situation usually is a circumstance where there are no potential living donors and people are waiting on the waiting list for a deceased donor. And as Rebbitzen Palatnik said, there's quite a long waiting list. Fortunately, in this country, it's not quite as long as the 5+ years that she describes in New York. But nonetheless, it's measured in years. It's about 2 and a bit years is the average length of time. And people understandably would like to circumvent that. And we know that a number of people go to certain countries where organs can be bought and sold. As far as I know, there's only one country in the world in which there is a legal national market in organs, and that's the Islamic Republic of Iran, where it is a business. It is regulated, but it is a business. Most places it's illegal. And the worry we have is that people go away to an unregulated system that may be very high quality, and there's evidence that many of them are, and they come back and they are well, but some people don't come back. And some people are not going to as well regulated a system. So that is my major concern about people going abroad.
Thank you. Just a question which I think is worth covering, even though it seems a bit obvious in the context of what we've been discussing, but why is donation and transplantation so important?
So Rebbitzen Palatnik talked about the conversation she had with her recipient, both before and afterwards. I, of course, have had many conversations with recipients over the years, and just every so often, usually in the first couple of months after the transplant, they come bounding into my clinic room and they say, "Thank you very much for giving me my life back." And I always say to them, "I didn't give you your life back. Your donor gave you your life back." But actually, that's what happened. In very round figures, the life expectancy following a transplant doubles compared with remaining on dialysis. And it's not just life expectancy, it's quality of life. So people who are on dialysis are often unaware of quite how unwell they are, how tired they are, how little energy they've got, how many of the things they love to do they can no longer do, because it's often crept upon them over a period of years. Following the transplant, they suddenly realize that they've got their energy back. They can go back and do those things, and they realize how much better they were. So it's not just a matter of life expectancy improving, it's a matter of quality of life as well. And that's why, as you can imagine, it's such a rewarding area of medicine to be in, because you transform people's lives with the agency of the donor.
Thank you very much, Professor Warrens. We'll get back to you a little bit later. Let me just make mention of the fact you talked a little bit about donation, deceased donation. That's emphatically not the subject that we're covering today, but the London Beth Din and the Chief Rabbi's Office has done an awful lot of work regarding the recent opt-in, opt-out discussion. And please do look that up on their websites. And if people are interested in donation, it's a very important and significant area and you'll be able to look at the Jewish religious perspective on that through them. And certainly it's another area where we might have another discussion at a later stage. Turning now to Mr. Jeremy Crane, who's a consultant transplant and vascular surgeon based in London. He is an honorary senior lecturer and the lead for education and training in transplant and vascular access surgery at Imperial College Healthcare, NHS Trust. His practice encompasses kidney and pancreas transplantation, dialysis access surgery, vascular surgery, including varicose vein surgery, and he has a specialist interest in treating chronic wounds. He's based primarily at Hammersmith Hospital, where he provides a kidney and pancreas transplantation service and has set up a program of vascular access surgery for hemodialysis patients, the first of its kind in Northwest London. And welcome this evening, Jeremy. Lovely to have you with us. There you are. You should be unmuted now. Can you tell us how you got into transplant surgery?
Thank you, Rabbi Lawrence. This is a fantastic evening, by the way, and that story from Laurie was inspirational. So I was training primarily at St Mary's Hospital in Paddington in vascular surgery, mainstream vascular surgery. And my dad, who I think might be online at the moment, had a kidney transplant towards the end of my training. And that was in Manchester, the Manchester Royal Infirmary. And it did pique my interest in transplantation. I didn't know much about it beforehand because it's quite a niche area, a niche surgical area. So I said to my program trained director, I fancy doing a bit of time in transplant surgery. There's just a bit of time out from vascular surgery. So I went to the Hammersmith and I saw my first transplant and I was hooked. And then that's how it all kicked off. And so what I then did, I was lucky enough to become dually trained in both vascular and transplant surgery. And I've been able to perform those two types of surgery together. Essentially, they're very closely related. They're both, I'm essentially a plumber of arteries and veins. So from that perspective, it's a very rewarding career. Transplantation is like nothing else. I mean, when you're operating on a transplant and you take the clamps off and the organ in front of you, which ostensibly is a dead organ that's been sitting in ice and it comes to life, it's a very magical moment that, you know, other surgeons don't get to see. So really, it's a privilege.
We're always looking for plumbers. Can you talk us through the process of being a donor?
Okay, so there's two aspects to it, because there's the aspect of the actual surgery itself, but leading up to that surgery. So just let me talk about a few points, and Laurie also intimated a few of these points as well. So as Professor Warren said, it's much better to receive a kidney from a live donor if possible. And not everyone has that privilege of having a live donor. But essentially, the recipient comes along to the transplant unit, and these patients with kidney disease have chronic kidney disease, different stages. And what normally happens is that the kidney function deteriorates over months and years. And as you're nearing the time, the patient nears the time when they're going to need renal replacement therapy, that is either a transplant or dialysis, these important conversations happen. And often the surgeons will say, do you have a donor? And if the answer is yes, they'll turn up with a donor, a loved one normally. And we put that donor through very, very stringent tests, very rigorous testing. So we, you know, from top to bottom, essentially lots of different x-rays and blood tests, et cetera, et cetera. And what we found is that those people that step forward to be living donors like Laurie, if you compare them with longitudinal observational studies at age and sex match controls, you'll find that people that give a kidney, regardless of the fact they have only one kidney, tend to live longer than those with two kidneys, which is very interesting. And it might be because they're very motivated and individuals that look after themselves. And also they've had this gamut of tests to make sure that everything's okay. So once we've been through all those different tests and both donor and recipient have been given the green light, then the surgery happens. But the advantage of this surgery is it's not a patient waiting on the list for a deceased donor, because that's an unscheduled emergency operation. This is an elective operation. So in other words, we can time it. So we know the date, we know the time. And what happens then is that while the surgeon that's doing what we call a donor nephrectomy, taking the kidney out, is taking the kidney out and is taking it out, I then have a look at the side of the operating table on what we call bench work, make sure the kidney's fine. And at that point, the anaesthetist will then be putting the recipient to sleep. So an hour later, I'm then operating, doing the transplant. So the time that the kidney spends out of the donor into the recipient is a matter of an hour or so. Whereas on average for a deceased donor, it can be up to 20 or so hours. It's what we call the cold ischemic time. And we know that in terms of outcomes, the shorter the cold ischemic time, the better it is. And that's one of the reasons why live donor kidneys do better. So talking about the operation, we mentioned about risk before. For a donor, the risk of dying is about 1 in 3,000, the same as having an appendix. And it's never happened in the UK. But as a community, the first thing, as a medical community, the first thing is do no harm. So we have to make sure that this is the safest operation it can be, because we're ostensibly taking a healthy person that doesn't need an operation for quite a morbid operation. There's a lot of morbidity attached to it. And therefore, we are very, very careful. And normally, the donor will stay in hospital for 3 to 6 days, and on the whole, does very, very well.
So I'm, early 50s, one of 300 people on this call, highly motivated by Laurie's story. I don't look after myself quite as well as possibly I should, but I want to do my bit. Slightly high blood pressure, medicated, under control. Does this speak to me? Am I able to be a donor?
Well, first of all, you do look quite a healthy specimen. I'll say that to start off with. So it's a very good question. So a lot of us at the age of about 50 are on maybe one antihypertensive agent. So that doesn't preclude you at all. So you go through a really rigorous set of tests. Now, if you have a bit of blood pressure or even maybe some diabetes, as long as those disease processes such as hypertension, which is common, hasn't caused what we call end organ damage. So as long as the heart hasn't been affected by it and your kidneys are absolutely fine, then the chances are, if other investigations prove to be negative, yes, you could step forward and give a kidney. So a lot of people that say, right, I'm out of this because I'm really overweight. No, hold on a second there, because in our institution at Imperial, where we have a massive kidney transplant program, we do take kidneys from extremely overweight patients who do very well. So don't discount yourselves. Potentially a lot of us could become a donor and we wouldn't have thought so.
Just, following on with that, clearly it's a good way of losing just a little bit of weight very quickly. But after that, do we get looked after by the transplant unit on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, absolutely. So moving forward after the operation, you're looked after quite extensively for the first few weeks to months. And then yearly, you'll come to our transplant unit and we'll check you over. We find that donors do very well. We don't expect any issues. So, but yes, you are looked after very, very closely.
Right. So one of the things that Laurie mentioned before was that she was a higher COVID risk as a consequence of the operation, or she was treated as a higher COVID risk. What are the implications or consequences to a donor?
In terms of COVID?
In terms of everything.
Okay, so there is a very, very slightly increased risk of renal failure moving forward, but then that equates to essentially the same proportion of people having kidney disease as the rest of the population. There isn't any other major problems. Occasionally hypertension. You might get a little bit of proteinuria, which is normally innocuous, nothing to worry about. I think the COVID thing, Laurie, obviously every hospital, institution and country has got different protocols. I think that from my perspective, I think it's been slightly over exaggerated, possibly your COVID risk. I personally see you as an extremely healthy specimen, and I wouldn't say that you have increased problems or risks with COVID, if I'm really honest. So maybe in America, they're extremely cautious, and I believe they are. So I don't see you can relax, I think. But what I would say is that, as I said before, donors tend to live longer than the rest of the population. So Once you've donated and you're well looked after the first few weeks, I don't have any worries about you.
Right. Is there an age limit to be a donor?
Good question. Not really. We would say a cutoff of about 60, but about 5 years ago, I transplanted a lovely chap in his 40s where the kidney came from a 75-year-old lady. And the reason I can talk about that is because through mutual desire, they met up with each other via NHSBT after the transplant, became very close friends. She was 75 years old and the kidney worked beautifully. So no age cutoff.
Thank you. One of the questions that's come through is how often is a live transplant not a success for the recipient, which I think is possibly the wrong way of asking the question. But it gives us the opportunity to talk about what is the success rate and how do we determine success in a donation?
Okay, so that's a really important question because it opens up a few other queries from that. So we would say at 1 year, 95% of kidneys from a live donor are working well, okay? But that 1 in 20 is not going to work. And so really importantly, the donor and recipient, who are often close, not always as in Laurie's case, but often close like a loved one or a good friend, they have to discuss about the fact that, hold on a second, this might not work out. And how are we going to react to that? Because there's a lot of things of remorse and guilt and a lot of emotional baggage that comes with this. So I think 95% at 1 year is pretty phenomenal, and early 90s at 5 years. So actually, it's slightly better than deceased donation. It's not a huge amount better, but it's better because, as you know, we're constantly pushing the boundaries, and deceased donation, which we're not talking about here, is actually getting better with time. But live donor has the edge, and at 1 year and 5 year and 10 years, most of these kidneys are still working and working well.
So thank you very much, Jeremy, and we'll come back to you with some questions very shortly, but let's go over to Professor Elizabeth Lightstone, who's an esteemed consultant nephrologist operating in London. She specializes in chronic kidney disease, nephritis, and kidney disease in women, both during and pre-pregnancy. Professor Lightstone has been involved in a number of research projects and clinical trials to attempt to find better solutions to the management of conditions in her field. Professor Lightstone has also set up and managed a number of clinics for women with kidney disease. And alongside her clinical practice, Professor Lightstone is dedicated to education and holds a number of posts teaching medical students at both undergraduate and postgraduate levels. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. I know you are on call. How does one go about having the family conversation?
I think I was very intrigued. Thank you very much for inviting me for a start. And Laurie, your story was inspirational. I was very taken that Laurie did not tell her husband to start with. And I think the need to be a donor comes from within oneself. But I think you should start talking. I know we're not talking about deceased donation, but I think talking about our views on our bodies and what we want done with them and what we think about these things, we should have much more open conversations with our families. And my sister, who's a doctor and a palliative care physician, just brought up the analogy about blood transfusion. We never, people are able to give blood, don't really think about it. We don't know who we're giving it to. We just know it's a good thing to do. And I fully accept that giving a kidney is a bit bigger than giving a blood transfusion, but in a way, the principle is the same for altruistic donation. You've no idea who it's going to, it's going to do good. So it is your decision, but I think Dayan Gelley put it very well. There are more holistic issues to consider. There's your family, there's your place in the community, there's the problem if anything goes wrong, but we've heard that's very unlikely. So I think you just open the conversation and say, this is what I'm thinking about. Often it can be triggered in the way Laurie's was because you realize you've got a friend with it. And I think it's much more common in our community than we realize. I use the example of my hairdresser, where I think 3 of the people who work in the hairdressers have very close relatives who've had bad kidney disease and have had transplants. And actually most of them live donation, not altruistic donation. And that's just a random hairdresser in Stanmore. So, it is out there, but people don't really talk about it until they meet someone or know someone with it. I think we should start having these conversations that we're thinking about it. What do you think about it? What if I suggested I was going to do it? How would you feel?
Is it the kind of conversation that you want to bring the person into at the very beginning? Or, you know, Laurie talked about her husband finding the paperwork there. You know, you must be used to confidential family conversations on things like that. Is there a right way of dealing with it? And, you know, certainly within the Jewish community, how do you deal with the God forbid attitude? You know, I just don't want you to be involved.
I think it's really difficult, and then clearly it will be absolutely context dependent on your spouse and your family. But I've had conversations from the other side, if you like, because I look after people with chronic kidney disease and coming up to the whole problem of you are going to need a kidney. And we now are much more bold. We say, who is your donor? And a lot of people will say, I don't want to ask, I don't want to have that conversation. And encouraging them to say, actually, people are very willing to give and will be quite cross if they've not been given the opportunity to give. So just say, look, I'm in this position and I look like I might be needing a kidney. And that opens up a conversation, often with really wonderful consequences, and friends and people you never thought of. Thought what Laurie said again, you really do find out who your friends are when you need a kidney. But I think equally, if you've started to have those much more open conversations in your family, it is easier. I'm not sure I would keep it a secret until I was just about ready to go. I think I would say, I'm thinking of doing this. What do you think? The problem is that I think lots of people think it's an extraordinary thing to do, and it is an extraordinarily wonderful thing to do, but they'll try and put you off. And you've got to, I suppose, have embedded it in yourself that it's something you really want to do before you can deal with those challenges. So I suspect it comes that you've had those discussions first and feel stronger, and then you bring it up with your family.
All right, thank you. I just to let people know, over the last couple of days leading into this discussion, I've had 3 people directly in contact with me saying, you know, they're fascinated to hear this event is happening, and they are thinking of becoming donors. So, you know, this kind of event is really important. One of the things that I'd like to have people turn their mind to a little bit on the panel for a moment's time is what we can do to increase awareness beyond just events such as these. One of the things, Professor Lightstone, that's come up is a discussion of paired and pooled donation. Could you just explain the process there?
Okay, so what normally happens, I mean, the commonest scenario with living donation is, God forbid, I've got kidney failure. My husband says, I want to give you a kidney. But actually, when you put us together in a test tube, as it were, we might be blood group incompatible, and Laurie gave a good explanation of that. Or it may be that we're tissue type incompatible. And the tissue type, we can develop antibodies, and that's particularly relevant for my women patients, because pregnancy is what we call a sensitizing event, because you're mixing, the child is a mix of both parents. You might have generated antibodies to your spouse, literally rather than metaphorically, so that you can't have a kidney from your spouse or your loved one who wants to give you one, but they have a perfectly good kidney they want to give away. You're a perfectly good recipient. So what started in 2007 was this concept of paired and pooled. So the original thing was you found another donor pair who couldn't give to each other, but they can give across. So the donor from one gives to you and the donor from the other gives to the other. And so that sort of unlocks some of these impossible live donation pairs. But then what really unlocks things is an altruistic donor, because some people don't have a live donor, and some people, there just isn't a match out there. But if you have one altruistic donor, they can give to the person who hasn't got a match. Their partner can then give to the next person down the chain, and you can make these really long chains that don't now all have to happen on the same day. You don't have to those amazing surgeries where there's 8 transplants in a day across the whole of the USA or the UK, because we trust people to fulfill their obligation that once their partner has got the kidney, they will carry on and donate to the next person in the chain. And an altruistic donor can unlock a really long chain of donations. So an extraordinary thing to do.
Right. Who runs the pool? you know?
Oh, that's all run nationally. So in the UK, it is very different from the US, and Anthony would be more of an expert on this, but it isn't the what's called NHSBT, the National Health Blood and Transfusion Service. There is a, all our patients go onto a waiting list, and for paired and pooled, there are 4 runs a year where they match 200 people or so and try out the best matches for everyone, and they come up with the best scheme. It's completely out of the hands of the local doctors. You put forward your pairs or your altruistic donor into that system, and the system is run and will come up with the right algorithm. It's appropriately impersonal. It's all done on best match, waiting times, those sort of things, to make sure it's the fairest possible scheme.
Right. I'm not sure if you're the right person to be answering this, but at the moment, how has all of this been affected by what's happening in the hospitals and the COVID wards?
Oh, it's very sad. So in London, as you know, London hospitals are overwhelmed, and slowly but surely all the transplanting units have had to stop. So a lot of us stopped in the first wave and had restarted and did a lot of transplants in the small gap. And then we did live donations in the private sector. We did some live donation in a sort of COVID secure environment. We restarted sort of more normally in the summer, but now actually gradually all the London hospitals have gone offline, and I suspect around the country, I don't know how many have stopped, but we are not, as of last week, I can't remember exactly when our last transplant was, but it's just not safe. It's not safe both for the recipients to be in hospitals where there is so much COVID, but also because we need all the resource we have for COVID care.
Must be a very gloomy time for the people on dialysis as well.
It's an extraordinarily scary time for people on dialysis. So if you're in centre, and I apologise if there's anyone on dialysis in this, because it's hard to hear, but they'll be very well aware. So if you're on in-centre hemodialysis, you should be shielding. You are clinically extremely vulnerable. And I completely agree with Jeremy. Laurie, you're not. But you are if you're on dialysis. And you should be shielding, but you have to come into a hospital setting 3 times a week. You have no choice because it's life-sustaining to be on dialysis. And in the first wave, 3% of the UK people on in-centre dialysis died from COVID. And I can give you the example from Imperial. We have 1,500 dialysis patients. In the first wave, over 300 contracted COVID. And whilst many were okay and got antibodies, etc., 80 died. And we're now seeing that the ones who didn't get it first time round are definitely getting it this time round. So it's catastrophically bad to be on dialysis in the era of COVID. And the light on the horizon is to get them vaccinated. And that's our absolute priority.
Right. If someone's recovered from cancer, can they be a donor?
That's a very good question. Actually, I might defer to Anthony as somebody who has myself. My understanding is no, that I wouldn't be very popular as a donor. But I think there may be a time limit on that, and it will depend on the form of cancer. We accept from deceased donors people with certain brain tumours. But Anthony, perhaps you can confirm what the rules are?
Well, you're absolutely right, Liz. Certainly brain tumours are not a contraindication, and it depends on the nature of the cancer, quite how widely spread it was at the time the diagnosis was made, and how long the person is perceived to have been disease-free. So it's a very individual decision, but in the majority of cases, one would not consider somebody who had cancer as a potential donor. It would be relatively unusual.
Thanks very much. Can someone who has donated continue to drink alcohol, clearly in moderation?
Yes.
Yes, that was very quick. That was without any hesitation. We'll accept a first opinion and not look for a second opinion on that one. This one needs to go to Mr. Crane because I know he does run marathons. Can people who have donated continue to run marathons?
100%. I mean, it's important for them to keep well hydrated, look after their solitary kidney, but absolutely yes.
Right. Really important. I mean, to all of us here, what do we need to do to look after our kidneys?
Okay, I'll take this one. So the most important things, I mean, they'll always tell you drink lots of fluid, and yeah, keeping yourself hydrated is a good thing. But actually, there are key things: keeping your blood pressure normal. And I would say that women have a massive advantage over men here, because women, by nature of the things they go through life, get their blood pressure measured and their urine dipped, because we go through gynecology and obstetrics. Men can avoid having all those things done forever and ever. And I think having your blood pressure checked to check it's normal, and to then maintain it at normal if it's not normal, and having your urine dip to check that there is no protein or blood in the urine would be the two things that would get you on course to ensure that your kidneys are healthy, or that they need some work to get them healthy. Those are the most important things.
Thanks very much. Questions come up on the chat here. When a recipient gets the new kidney, is the old one left in place?
So the answer is the old one is left in place for a couple of reasons. Firstly, for someone that's had chronic kidney disease for many years, what happens to those kidneys? They sort of shrivel up. So they go from a size of a fist to a size of maybe a small apricot or so. And they're in quite a difficult place within the body. They're underneath the thorax, at the top of the abdomen, right at the back. So you would just absolutely leave them alone, and you would make a new place for the kidney, which is normally in the groin on the right-hand side. So we normally go to the right-hand side first, because the blood vessels that we attach the kidney to are slightly more superficial, so it's slightly close to the surface than on the left-hand side.
Are there any treatments beyond dialysis that people can look to if they can't find a donor?
So that's an interesting question. So leading up to a point where one is going to need renal replacement therapy, apart from dialysis, and there's other forms of dialysis, there's something called peritoneal dialysis, which is a totally different form of dialysis. Apart from dialysis and a transplant, the answer is really no. Although in certain situations, dialysis isn't for everyone. So there's sort of palliative type treatments that can keep people going for a while without needing dialysis. But essentially, once you get to a certain point, you will need dialysis, because some of the salts in the blood, for example, potassium, starts rising, and that can be very, very dangerous. You need to get rid of that potassium via dialysis.
And another question that's come through, it's a great question. What might stop someone from appearing or being able to get onto the transplant list?
So the thing about a transplant is it's not a panacea. So it's the best treatment of choice in certain individuals, because firstly, you have to be able to survive the operation to enjoy the quality and quantity of life afterwards. So there has to be a risk profile that, when it comes to risk benefit, doesn't outweigh the benefits. So for example, if we think there's a high risk of, say, a coronary event, someone that's got quite bad coronary disease, then we wouldn't go ahead with the transplant. So a bit like with the live donor, all those tests, for someone to actually get onto the transplant list, the deceased donor transplant list or the live donor list, then they would need to go through a lot of investigations to make sure that we think they're going to sail through the operation and do well from it.
Thank you very much. We're coming to the time I promised you would be able to get back to all your really important work. And let me take the opportunity to thank everybody who's been a part of this so far. Just a final question to each of our panelists, and also to Laurie, if she's still here. Laurie, are you still here? I haven't got the whole screen open.
I'm still here.
You're here. So let me put it to you first. What do you think we can do to get more people aware, interested, and motivated?
You know, a lot of people who have either heard me speak or people I know ended up donating their kidney. Why? Because when you meet somebody who did it, you're like, oh my gosh, like if she could do it, I can do it, because I'm just a person just like you. So I think it's really sharing stories is very important, that the more people you meet, like who have done it from all walks of life. And I know in the Jewish community, because there's misconceptions, thinking like, oh, it's forbidden in halacha. So because I'm a rabbi's wife and because I'm religious, all the more so I feel like to put my story out there so that people see like that it is possible.
Thank you very much. Dayan, Gelley, is there anything particularly you want to add from a halachic perspective that we haven't covered? And from your own point of view, would you like to give a final message on how we can motivate more people?
Okay. Just a little disclaimer, my few words before was not a full lecture on this because we didn't discuss the idea of elective surgery, which is a very interesting subject. Is one allowed just to go for an operation one doesn't need to have, and etc. But because bottom line, the answer is in this situation, yes, I didn't need to take the audience there. There is more to talk about, but please God, once time for a share, please God, a live share. If you'll ever invite me to your shul, please God, in the good times to come. The only thing I would like to add to this conversation is that 2 countries in the world have successfully got groupings going. One is Relate in America, and one is Matnas Chaim, appropriately named the Gift of Life in Israel. They were operational here with the Royal Free at one time, and sort of, I don't know exactly know what happened. And perhaps for some things we could be in contact, just knowing operationally sort of how they got theirs off the ground, and we may not have to create the wheel from scratch to begin with, and these are possibly good contacts, people to be in contact with to take it forward in this country.
Thank you very much. Professor Warrens, any final thoughts?
In terms of making people aware, I think the important thing that we've discovered through quite a bit of research is that you want to have champions within a community. And Laurie's obviously an excellent example of one such champion. But in other communities who are unaware of many of the things we've been talking about, organizations such as Kidney Research UK have developed champions from within some of the minority ethnic communities to address some of the issues that are of concern to them, so that they can relate to them and help understand some of the anxieties they have. Very important, because the prevalence of diabetes and hypertension in many of our minority communities in this country is extremely high, and indeed a higher percentage of Asian diabetics get renal disease than Caucasian diabetics. So we need local champions, and would that we could have more local champions in this country like you, Laurie. Shakach to you for the fantastic work that you have done and for presenting it so engagingly this evening.
Thank you very much. Mr. Crane.
So yes, absolutely. Shattering these misconceptions, really important. And actually evenings like this are crucial, because there's a few hundred people on this thing tonight, and they're all hearing things often for the first time. So evenings like this, congratulations to Barbie, because this is exactly what we need. And also in terms of ethnic communities where transplantation is a real issue in terms of donors, we could be a trailblazer, and we're a very small community, but if we show that we're willing to give and be involved, then we could act as an example to all the other minority communities out there.
Thanks very much. In the event that somebody is interested in becoming an altruistic donor, who should they be in touch with next?
Well, their GP can contact their local transplant unit, or they can get in touch themselves with a transplant unit. Each unit has a special nurse for organ donation that will take them on and take their story further. So absolutely, either GP or your local transplant unit.
Thanks. And the website to go to?
Well, each unit has its own website, but I would suggest going via the GP.
Via the GP. Thank you very much. Professor Lightstone.
Well, little to add, really. I do think Laurie's right. Stories are very powerful. And seeing someone looking so well and being so well and had such a positive experience. At Imperial, we run seminars where we have live donor pairs come in and talk. And it is transformative, because people don't really know what they're going to go through, and they worry. And we get people thinking about live donation coming in. I am hugely impressed by the number of people who've joined tonight. I mean, it shows there's a thirst out there for information. So kudos to you and Barbie for setting this up. And I think we need to just continue the conversation and make sure that people are aware. There's lots and lots and lots of misconceptions out there about what's allowed and what's not allowed. So this is a fantastic start.
Thank you very much. When I was in Australia and first got involved in discussing organ transplantation and donation with people there, as a way of making the faith communities much more aware of it, I was taken into a dialysis ward where one of the main talk show radio hosts went in 3 times a week for treatment, I think it was. He was waiting for a kidney, and he ran his radio show while he was being dialyzed on some days. And the realization that people are encumbered and unable to do so much in their lives when they are waiting for transplants, but at the same time, what life and productivity is within them, if only we can restore them to normalcy as well. And it was just amazing to sit watching somebody on their computer and taking calls and involved in setting up their show, and realizing he couldn't go on holiday properly, and he was unable to be away from hospitals, and there was so much he was unable to do with a loving family and people he could just go back to. You know, what could we do to give someone the gift, the restoration of normalcy in life with so many good and healthy years ahead of them? It's really remarkable work that everybody on this panel is doing. Your time and your energy this evening are hugely appreciated in everything that you're doing in the community and beyond, and for the health of people in this country. So thank you, Dayan Gelley, thank you, Professor Warrens, thank you, Mr. Crane, thank you, Professor Lightstone, and thank you very much, Laurie, for sharing your story from Israel. Let me just share a screen very briefly to highlight a couple of important events that we've got ahead, where we are looking at the secret synagogues and ancient rites of Ethiopia's hidden Jews on the 3rd of February. That's a fascinating story, and I hope people will join us for that. But also a wonderful series that's been set up for, particularly following on from this, for people who are interested in the medical issues, with Professor Martin Kaplan, another distinguished member of Finchley United Synagogue. Healthcare talks, healthcare problems for children during the pandemic, the latest thinking on disease, medical advances, and for the over 70s, optimizing your health. And those are on the 19th of January, the 2nd of March, and the 13th of April, all at 8 p.m. Hope that people will be able to join us for that wonderful series. But now finally, let me hand over to Barbie to have the last word, and thank you for your energy in driving this event and putting it together for us this evening. Barbie?
I was muted. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi Lawrence. And I'm very conscious this could sound like an Oscar, you know, receiving an Oscar thank you session, but I have to say it. I just want to thank all the speakers, Dayan Gelley, Jeremy Crane, Anthony Warrens, Liz Lightstone, and Laurie Palatnik. I mean, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. I rang you, I asked you, and you all just said yes, yes, yes. And I can't thank you enough. And a special thank you to Rabbi Lawrence, who without his help, this wouldn't have happened. So thank you so much. And I just want to say a special shout out to Shimon Kramer, who has also been fantastic. And the biggest thank you I want to thank is to all the people that I nudged and reminded again and annoyed to make this incredible number of people come on tonight. And I just hope we've all learned something new and can take this away and have much to think about and ruminate. And thank you again to the doctors at this incredible time for giving of your time. It is such a difficult time for all of us. So my last words to everyone is stay safe, keep well, and let's keep working.
Thank
you very much indeed. Stay safe and have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.